What if the thing you keep calling a dead end is actually God's chosen doorway? What if the delay that frustrates you is not denial, it's divine timing? And what if the reason you feel trapped is because God is about to do something so undeniable? You'll never be the same, because this is how God works. He brings you out, and then he brings you to a place where you can't save yourself. So you finally see who he is. In the book of Exodus, chapter 14, Israel has finally left Egypt. This isn't a small moment. This is the end of slavery, the end of whips, the end of bricks without straw, the end of being treated like they don't matter. God has already sent signs and plagues. God has already humbled Pharaoh. God has already opened the door for them to leave. But freedom is not always a straight line. Israel walks, and then they reach the sea. In front of them is the Red Sea, deep, wide, impossible. Behind them is Pharaoh, furious and determined, racing after them with chariots. And the people feel it, the noise, the dust, the ground shaking under enemy horses. Then fear starts talking. They look at Moses and say words that many of us have said in different ways. Why did you bring us out here to die? Wasn't it better back there? Do you hear how fear rewrites history? Slavery suddenly sounds safer when the future looks uncertain. But God speaks. God tells Moses something that doesn't match what the eyes can see. Tell the people to go forward. Forward into what? Water. Forward into what? Risk. Forward into what? A place where you can't pretend you're in control. Then Moses lifts his staff, and God sends a strong wind, and the sea splits. Walls of water rise on both sides, and a path appears where no path existed. Israel walks through on dry ground, and Pharaoh follows. The enemy assumes the miracle is available for anyone who wants it. But the path that saves Israel becomes a trap for Egypt. The waters return, and what chased them is swallowed. God didn't just open a way forward. He closed the door behind them. Now let's slow down, because the most powerful part isn't only that the sea opened. It's when the people stood between two impossibilities, water in front, death behind. That's the moment where faith is tested, not in comfort, but in pressure. Think about it. The sea didn't split when they felt brave. The sea didn't split when everything was calm. The sea split when their options were gone. That's why this story pierces the heart. God waited until there was no human solution. Then he revealed a divine one. And here's the tension that hits your spirit. The same miracle that becomes your deliverance becomes your enemy's defeat. Do you understand what that means? That means God can take the thing that scares you and turn it into the very place where fear loses its power over you. God can take the boundary you can't cross and make it your bridge. God can take what is too much for you and use it to show his strength, because the Red Sea wasn't just geography. It was a line in the sand between who they were and who they were becoming. Now I'm talking to you. You have a Red Sea too. Maybe your Red Sea is financial pressure that keeps tightening like a rope. Maybe it's anxiety, where your mind runs in circles and you can't quiet it. Maybe it's a family situation that feels like a battle you didn't choose. Maybe it's a temptation that keeps chasing you like Pharaoh's chariots, fast, loud, relentless. Maybe it's disappointment, because you thought you'd be further by now. Maybe it's grief, because you're carrying something heavy and nobody really sees it. And you keep asking God, why am I here? Why did you bring me this far just to get stuck? Why does it feel like I'm cornered? Listen carefully. Being cornered does not mean being forsaken. Sometimes God corners the flesh so faith can finally speak. Because as long as you still have a backup plan, you might never fully trust God. As long as you still have an Egypt to run back to, you might keep negotiating with bondage. Let me say it plain. Some of you keep returning to Egypt emotionally. You're free in your position, but not free in your mind. You're out of the chains, but still chained to old patterns. Egypt looks different for everyone. It can be a relationship that God already told you to release. It can be a habit you keep excusing. It can be a secret compromise you call small, but it's stealing your peace. It can be the need to control everything, because trusting God feels scary. And when pressure rises, you start thinking, maybe I should go back. Maybe I should go back to what's familiar. Maybe I should go back to what numbs me. Maybe I should go back to what God already freed me from. But God's word in Exodus 14 is not, go back and manage your chains. God's word is, go forward. Now here's the part that will change how you live. Going forward doesn't mean you feel ready. Going forward means you obey while you still feel afraid. Faith is not the absence of fear. Faith is the decision that God is greater than what you see. So what does go forward look like today? It looks like praying when you don't feel spiritual. It looks like telling the truth instead of performing. It looks like cutting off what keeps pulling you into sin, even if it's inconvenient. It looks like forgiving when your feelings are still bleeding. It looks like taking the next right step, not the whole staircase, because God often gives you a step, not a map. And some of you are stuck because you want God to explain the miracle before you move. But God is not asking you to understand. He's asking you to trust. What if the sea is still closed because you're still waiting to feel confident? What if God is waiting for obedience, not emotions? What if your breakthrough is attached to your movement? Here's another truth. When Israel walked through the sea, they were walking between walls of water, meaning the threat didn't vanish, it was held back by God. So if you're walking forward and it still feels intense, that doesn't mean God failed. It might mean God is holding back what would have destroyed you. You're not walking alone. You're walking through a miracle that is actively being sustained. And Pharaoh, your enemy, still tried to follow. That's what the enemy does. He tries to chase you into your miracle so you feel like you can't have peace. He tries to convince you that deliverance is temporary. He tries to whisper, you'll never really be free. But the ending matters. God made sure the thing that chased them could not chase them anymore. So hear me. God is not only going to rescue you, He's going to break the pattern behind you. He's going to shut the door on what used to control you. He's going to do it in a way that you can't take credit for, because when God saves, He gets the glory. So here's your moment. Stop rehearsing Egypt. Stop negotiating with what God already delivered you from. Stop calling it the end when God calls it the way. Right now type, I'm going forward, and pray this out loud. Lord, I trust you. Open a way where I see none. Give me courage to obey even while I tremble. I will not go back. And when fear rises again, because it will try, say this. God didn't bring me out to leave me here. He will make a way. Keep walking. The Red Sea is not your grave. It's your testimony. And the God who opened the sea is still the God who opens doors.